period in which more normal Americans chose to break a law than at any other period.
Alcohol in America plays a part as far back as the Massachusetts Puritans, who brought with them 42 tons of beer and 10,000 gallons of wine across the ocean. The country was founded with an expectant attitude towards the availability of alcohol. By 1900, the American people were spending $1.5 trillion on intoxicating drinks a year, and 50,000 men were employed in the business. People were drinking 3 times more each year than today's levels. At the turn of the 20th century, a new immigrant influx brought with it an even more alcohol-dependent culture.
In 1920, when Prohibition comes into effect, 2/3 of the population is of foreign birth or foreign parentage. And many of those people had this tradition of not getting drunk, but simply having liquor with a meal, or having liquor as a social occasion.
With their alcoholic tendencies, immigrants flooded saloons and there engaged in unruly behavior, frightening the already nativist Americans of the time. Soon, people began to see the detestment of alcohol as an American trait, to separate themselves from the drink-loving immigrants. This detestment of alcohol was not a new part of American culture. The temperance movement began early in the 1800s. By the 1830s, as many as 1 million Americans belonged to some sort of anti-alcohol group. In 1851, Maine took these anti-alcohol ideals and outlawed intoxicating drink for the first time in any American state. The previously temperate people of Maine began distilling alcohol in their homes and selling it in kitchen bars. They bought large amounts of medicinal alcohol and smuggled illegal liquor into the state in barrels marked sugar or flour. The Portland rum riots of 1855, killing 1 and injuring 7, were the last straw for the state and caused the repeal of the Maine law. Even after this prohibition law produced such a defiant response, the temperance movement picked up again after the Civil War with the establishment of the National Prohibition Party in 1869. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, founded in 1874, fought on the grounds of the terrible abuse and neglect suffered by the wives and families of drunkards. They claimed they would restore the founding virtues of the godly republic. The Anti-Saloon League of 1893 claimed, "Liquor is responsible for 19% of the divorces, 45% of child desertion, and 50% of the crime in this country." The temperance triumphed on January 16, 1919, when the 18th Amendment was passed. This led to the Volstead Act on October 27, 1919, which put into law the illegalization of the trade, sale, and consumption of intoxicating beverages. Just an hour after the enforcement of the Volstead Act began in January of 1920, 6 armed men stole $100,000 worth of medicinal liquor off of a train to Chicago. This was the first of what would become an innumerable tally of crimes committed under the watch of the law of Prohibition. During the period from 1920 to 1933, homicide rates rose 78% and robbery rose 83.3%. The biggest attraction of the illegal trade of liquor was the possible profit. In one day, a bootlegger could make $1,800, more than a prohibition officer would make in a year. Illegal liquor was primarily exchanged across the Great Lakes from Canada to Michigan, Ohio, and New York. People would even use private planes to cross the Great Lakes from Canada, and pay farmers huge sums as high as $5 a case, which was often more than they could earn from a year's harvest, to use their farms as landing sites. Criminal gangs started to gain significant power in cities.
One of the effects was to empower organized crime as a business.
Chicago especially was ruled by its thriving gang scene. Most famous of all was Al Capone, leader of the most powerful gang in Chicago during the 1920s. As the mastermind behind his organization, he was able to make profits as high as $60 million off of intoxicating drinks alone. The gangs brought with them to the city not only drinks, but violence. On Valentine's Day of 1929, several members of Capone's gang, disguised as police, entered an enemy headquarters and killed 7 members of the rival gang with machine guns. This occurrence is not unique. As one bootlegger recalls, anyone landing liquor along the Detroit waterfront had to be armed and prepared to fight to the death, as it was common practice for the Purples to steal a load of liquor and shoot whoever was with it. The Volstead Act included many loopholes to allow people to access alcohol. Families could request medicinal alcohol or join a synagogue or church, where they would receive a certain amount of wine each year for religious purposes. The number of rabbis saw a great increase during the Prohibition era for this same reason. Americans' interactions with bootleggers allowed for easy access to alcohol. Citizens used speakeasies as a social setting in which people collectively defied the law. Speakeasies were slightly exclusive in order to stay hidden from law enforcement. However, the sheer number of them meant most people would have the equivalent to their pre-Prohibition neighborhood saloon. By 1925, New York City had a known 100,000 speakeasies. In fact, the availability of a social drinking setting was increased during Prohibition. Within the first year of Prohibition, 32,000 speakeasies replaced the 15,000 legal drinking places of pre-Prohibition New York.
Speakeasies, illegal places, were open all hours of the day. There were no opening or closing hours. They were all open the place.
Encountering such easy access to alcohol caused citizens to doubt federal law.
And I am confident that the United States of America wants repeal.
A new drinking style arose, a dedicated drinking to show clear defiance to the law. Prohibition increased government spending by $300 million while decreasing revenue to the government by $11 billion. Prohibition officers would look the other way for sums as high as $300,000 a month from bootleggers and gangs.
One quote that I saw from a Cleveland cop during this time period that he said, "How would I enforce this if it's something I enjoy doing myself?"
Bootleggers sold drinks to congressmen and even the president, and officials sold pardons to bootleggers to make a little extra cash. Most importantly, in most small towns and cities, the social atmosphere pressured police to loosely enforce, if at all, the law of prohibition. It seemed as though the government didn't even want the law enforced, as there was only one prohibition officer for every 20,700 people. Speakeasies and bootleggers distributed more potent alcohol than they did light drinks like wine or beer. The price of whiskey and other strong spirits was much lower than that of beer because of the shipping logistics. More Americans who were simply looking for a light drink were forced to use strong and addictive drinks in place of beer. The biggest danger of bootleg liquor was its deregulation. On average, 1,000 people died each year because of encounters with dangerous alcohol, which often contained poisons. One never knew if what they were buying was really scotch or just industrial alcohol with caramel coloring added. During the Prohibition, it took only a tenth as much bootleg liquor as pre-Prohibition liquor to produce a certain degree of drunkenness. Most dangerous of all is that when interacting with bootleggers, it was easy to gain access to not only alcohol, but hard drugs as well. Intoxicating drink became a gateway drug. Today, the effects of this criminal and cultural reform due to the exchange and encounters during the Prohibition are still evident. Alcoholics Anonymous was created in 1935 after the strength of Prohibition-era alcohol created a new generation of alcoholics. Prohibition also weakened the public's trust in the government to do what is right. This trust was then ultimately shattered later in the 20th century by failures such as the Vietnam War or Watergate, which brought trust in the government down 47% between 1958 and 1980. Since then, public faith in the government has remained consistently low. People today look to the Prohibition to criticize the effectiveness of drug prohibitions, such as the prohibition on marijuana, which is viewed today as the gateway drug, like alcohol became during its prohibition. We also see under the repression of the war on drugs, the reemergence of powerful gangs, growing off of the profit of the underground drug trafficking business. Using the effective patterns of the Prohibition gangs, drug cartels allowed crack to be dangerously reintroduced in the 1980s.
Yeah, I got you covered.
I only want a little, come on.
Sure, I understand.
Just a couple hits. I don't have any money, please.
Prohibition ended with the 21st Amendment in 1933, but the revolution and criminal methods for felons and citizens alike, along with the cultural upheaval in the views of alcohol and the law, continue to affect American life almost 100 years later.